this time I might not. And Steve walked in with his poster. I was standing by Rebecca, and Rebecca says, "Oh my God, we got part 3 of Abraham." But no, we're looking at Moses today. So if you've got a Bible or a gadget, it's Hebrews 11:23 to 28. So I'm going to read that first. So Hebrews 11, as you know, goes through loads of men and women of faith, and it sort of follows a story really of the Old Testament. And this is just a bit about Moses. So I'm going to start by just reading that. So Hebrews 11:23 to 28 says, "By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that the child was beautiful and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ of greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. And by faith he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them." So that's what that passage says about Moses. Steve used a really good example when he started his talk, saying about the Dunkirk spirit, that you can describe that, and Richard did a very good job of describing in words what the Dunkirk spirit was. But actually, if anyone's seen the film Dunkirk, or if you were there and witnessing what was going on, you have a much better idea of what the Dunkirk spirit was. And actually that's what this guy's doing here with faith. So he describes what faith is in one sentence, but he goes on to show us and to explain. You can do that with anything, can't you? This week, I was reminded of this with like the word distraction. If you were trying to describe to someone, what does it mean to be distracted? You could explain that to someone, couldn't you? You could describe it, or you could just watch my youngest son. I mean, I was doing my teeth, and Claire downstairs was like, "Jude, can you just do your teeth? Please don't get distracted. You need to leave for school. Can you do your teeth?" So Jude trots, sure enough, comes up beside me, goes to get his toothbrush, picks up some dental floss. Floss. Puts it down. And it just stands there for 5 minutes. Yep, there we are. That is distracting. So this is what this is saying is these are a list of people, and this is what faith looks like. And I wanted to just say a quick bit about faith. So faith is something everyone has. And faith is, in a sense, what defines us, each and every person. I don't just mean religious faith or Christian faith. So I've got a colleague at work who's a Muslim, and he will often say, "Well, you're a man of faith like myself," is what he'll say. But actually, everyone is a man and a woman of faith, no matter what you believe. So atheists, are people of faith. Their faith is they believe that there is no God. That's a faith statement. You can't prove that. Even agnostics who would say, we don't know if there's a God. Well, that is a faith statement. Or certainly if you say, we just can't know. That's what you commonly get, isn't it? Well, you just can't know. Well, that is a statement of faith. You can't prove that you can't know. That is a statement of belief. I believe that you can't know if there's a God or not. So everybody, no matter what they say, are people of faith. And I suppose it's not really the faith, it's what you place your faith in that shapes you. So everyone places their faith in something, and whatever you place your faith in will shape your whole life, who you are, what you do. So good examples of that are things like financial security. So if your faith is in your financial position or the resources you have behind you, then that will affect the decisions you make in your life. It will affect what makes you anxious. It will affect what makes you happy. Suddenly your wealth is wiped out and you're incredibly anxious. All the foundations of everything that you put faith in has gone, or you suddenly find yourself in wealth and you suddenly feel less anxious and happy. And that shapes all your decisions that you make in your life. And so in all these passages, Steve talks about Abraham and Sarah, and this is about Moses. When he says they did this by faith, Abraham by faith, Moses by faith, what specifically it means is faith in God. I mean, that sounds to state the obvious, doesn't it? But actually, that's what this is about. So what this passage is about is, if you put your faith and trust in God, really, this is what your life will look like. This is what you will do. Actually, this is what, read things about these people, that's what it looks like, to really put your faith and trust in God. So that's, I suppose, just again, to emphasise what Steve was saying really about why the guy goes on to list so many people. So we left Abraham here, somewhere here. For those of you that remember, he started off over here, I'll come this side, and he did a journey all around this fertile crescent down here into this part. This is what is present day Israel. Obviously Egypt, Sinai here. And he sort of left him here. Abraham at the time Steve finished had a son, Isaac. Isaac had another son, Jacob. Jacob had his 12 sons, who became the 12 tribes of Israel. And one particular son, Joseph, ends up getting shipped out to Egypt. And eventually the whole family follow him to Egypt. And so you've got Abraham's journey with his family, sort of does all this, and actually ultimately ends up in Egypt. The promise that God gave to Abraham was that he would give him land. I will give you a land flowing with milk and honey. That was the promise to him. But still at this point, decades and generations later, they're still in this foreign land in Egypt. And they're there not for a little while, but they're there for 400 years. You know, we listen to Moz and Claire and say, well, it's a year's gone by and where's the project? But actually, God's timescales are way out of, 400 years they were in Egypt. This promise was given to Abraham, and then 3 generations later, 4 generations later, they're in Egypt, and then 400 years, nothing's happened, apart from they've just grown in number. And the people that are there didn't have Bibles. I know, again, these are obvious facts, but I think it's worth thinking that they didn't have Bibles that they could look at and say, well, this is what God was like. They had stories that were passed down from generation to generation about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. That's your God, and these are the promises, these are the things that God has said is going to happen. And they were passed down from generation to generation over these 400 years. So that is like from 1620 through to today, generation after generation after generation looks at these, were hearing these stories from their parents, and were believing in this promise that they would be rescued from Egypt. And that's where this bloke Moses comes in. So it's about 400 or so, close to 400 years down the line. So Moses was born about 1400 BC, 1400 years before Jesus. And he was born at a time when there was genocide in Egypt. So the Pharaoh got annoyed, so many people, these Israelites, he was worried about them. So what he said is, every time a male is born, I want you to throw him into the Nile. And the midwives were commissioned to do this. If an Israelite woman had a baby, if it was a girl, fine. If it was a boy, chuck him in the Nile. So he was born into quite a terrifying time, really, as a male. And the story, we all know the story. His mum didn't do that. She kept him. And when he was getting too big to hide, she made this basket thing and put him in the river and sort of let him float in the reeds. And he was found by Pharaoh's daughter. And Pharaoh's daughter decided she would keep him. And she was looking for someone that could nurse him. And went and got actually Miriam, who was Moses' sister, said, well, I think I might be able to find somebody that could nurse him. So she ran off and got his mum, and his mum spent all those early years in Pharaoh's house nursing Moses. I mean, that in itself is a nuts story, isn't it? That what happened. And obviously in that time, as Moses grew up, that enabled his mum to pass on all these stories. The stories of his people, stuff that Moses wouldn't have got if he'd just grown up in Pharaoh's house. So he learned all the stories and all the promises that would have been passed down, including, and this one is Genesis 15, from his mum would have said this to him. And this is what was recorded in Genesis, and it says this, it says, God said to Abraham, the Lord said to Abraham, know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not their own, and they will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterwards they shall come out with great possessions. So Moses would have grown up knowing that, hearing that, and he would have known how long they'd been in Egypt. And I wonder, you never know, I wonder whether Moses, or whether Moses' mum thought, this might be it. We've now got a guy that has miraculously ended up in Pharaoh's palace. You know, maybe this is how God is going to end up freeing us. Maybe he's going to grow up to be a man of authority. Maybe he'll even grow up to be Pharaoh. We'll certainly grow up maybe to have a man of authority, and through that process might be able to free us all. I don't know. You just wonder, don't you, whether that's what was going through their minds. And actually, we see in the first 40 years this is of Moses' life, he sort of grew up as a privileged kid, obviously, in the Pharaoh's house. And you see him almost trying to take stuff into his own hands. He sees an Egyptian fighting with one of his own people, and he steps in to stop that, and he kills the Egyptian. But it all backfires on him. And he ends up running for his life. Pharaoh hears about it, wants to kill him, and he ends up fleeing. So after 40 years of being really, really privileged, he flees to this place here, which is sort of North Arabia, and lives there for 40 years in a desert as a shepherd. So he goes from being the son of Pharaoh to being a shepherd in the desert and looking after sheep. And he marries. He looks after some sheep, he helps some shepherdesses out at a well, and the father of one of them says, well, you marry my daughter. So he married his daughter. They had a son, probably had more, but the first son was called Sojourner, was called a living in a foreign land. And that must have been we don't know a lot at all about that time of his life, but 40 years he spent there. 40 years, having been this Pharaoh's son with all that and all these maybe thoughts about what might have happened. And then he's left for 40 years tending sheep thinking, what has my life amounted to? What is this? Surely this wasn't the plan. And then we have the famous story, don't we, of when he met the burning bush, which is really where most of what I want to say today is on that part. So he's been looking after sheep, just living a life for 40 years, and then he has this encounter with God. There's so much you could say about Moses. Obviously, it's so foundational in the Old Testament. Really, I wanted us just to look at the passage where he meets God in the burning bush. Because I think, as I was reading through everything about Moses, I just thought this is the bit actually that we can all relate to. We can all relate to Moses' initial response to God asking him to do something. And so, as I'm going to just read through it, the bits where Moses speaks and then God speaks back to him. And I want us to just notice where Moses' eyes are. So what's Moses looking at? This is when God called him. Where does God try to turn Moses' eyes to? And then how do we ourselves, recognise, identify with Moses' response? Can we identify with Moses' response in anything that God might have asked us to do? So this is the part. So this is in Exodus, beginning of Exodus. It says, now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush, and Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it didn't burn up. So Moses thought, I'll go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. And as he approached the bush, The voice came from the bush and says, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And at this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. And God said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt, and I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. And I'm concerned about their suffering, so I've come down to rescue them from the hands of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. That was God's calling to him. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said to him, I will be with you. And Moses said to God, supposing I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of the fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what's his name? Then what shall I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. That's what you're to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. So Moses said, well, what if they don't believe me? Or listen to me? They'll say, the Lord didn't appear to you. And the Lord said to him, okay, well, what's that in your hand? And he had a staff, and he threw the staff on the ground, and it turned into a snake. He put his hand in his coat, and it turned leprous, and he put it in, and he took it out again, and it was clean. And then there was pouring water on the floor, turned into blood. And God basically said, I will give you signs to prove it. Okay, then Moses said to God, pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since that you've spoken to me. I am slow of speech and tongue. And God said to him, who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak and will teach you what to say. But Moses said, pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else. I don't know about you, but so many of those responses of Moses are my responses at times to when God speaks to me. And you can see, can't you, all of Moses' responses were based on himself. God asked him to do something and he says, well, I can't do that. I can't speak properly. All those things, and yet God kept telling him, no, but I can, and I will be with you. And it's that constant thing. So, and it's great following Moses, because he starts like that. His sight is all on himself, and you can follow the story through as God teaches him to actually stop looking at yourself and look at me. And the interesting thing worth pointing out is actually that Moses probably wrote this. He may not have done, but even if he didn't, he had to retell that story to somebody else to do it. Why would you include that? You know, why would you include that whole story about you keep saying, I don't want to do it, I don't want to do it, I don't want to do it, I'm rubbish? But the only reason is because actually when it was written or when he handed it on, his whole point was he wanted everyone to see that it wasn't him, that it was actually God. That was Moses' point in all this. And we did, very quickly, because I'm conscious we're over slightly today, but I just wanted to pull out a couple of other bits where we start seeing this change. Initially, Moses goes and he does tell the people, okay, he goes to Pharaoh, let my people go, God says, no, Pharaoh says, no, in fact I'm going to make it harder for them. So instead of just having to make a certain amount of bricks per day, they now have to go and find the straw to make the bricks and make the same number of bricks. So all the people are like, oh, I can't believe what you've done, Moses. And this is what it says, Exodus 5, it says, when Moses and Aaron left Pharaoh, they found the people and they came to him and says, the people came to Moses and Aaron and says, may the Lord look on you and judge you. You have made us obnoxious to Pharaoh and his officials and have put a sword in their hand to kill us. So Moses goes back to God and he says, why, Lord, have you brought trouble on this people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought trouble on this people, and you have not rescued your people at all. And again, there's Moses looking at, not God and who he is, but looking at the situation, looking at himself and the situation around him. And God goes on to say to him, I will rescue them, and deliver them from slavery, and take them out of Egypt to a land flowing with milk and honey. You go back to Pharaoh and say, and then Moses goes back to God and says, well, if the Israelites will not listen to me, why would Pharaoh listen to me, since I speak with faltering lips? All this way you see Moses basically still not working on his journey. But as the story goes on, there's less of that, less of Moses, and just this bit I think is one bit which is amazing. So they get out of Egypt, as you know, and so this is where they are, North Egypt, sort of up this aspect here. And as they leave Egypt, rather than going across here into Sinai here, God takes them right down here, and then across to a dead end, straight across to the sea here, like a real strange route. When you could have just gone straight across here, he takes them down here to a dead end, and it comes to the point where they've got the sea in front of them, and behind them they turn around and they've got the whole of Pharaoh's army charging after them. And so this is what it says in this passage. And here we can start seeing Moses as he starts changing what he's seeing. So the people see the sea and they see this army. And it says, as Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. And they were terrified, and they cried out to the Lord. And they said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. And then this is Moses' answer to them. He says, do not be afraid. Stand firm and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today will never be seen again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. That is a massive change, isn't it, from where he started? A massive change. And then Moses went on for the next 40 years, the third 40 years, if you like, of his life, basically just mincing around here. Circles and circles and circles and circles, looking after people in the wilderness. Many frustrations and everything, but it's an amazing. D.L. Moody said this. He says, Moses spent 40 years thinking that he was a somebody, 40 years realising he was a nobody, and then 40 years seeing what God can do with somebody who knows they're a nobody. And this is the end of Moses' life. So Moses basically, his whole life, turned his eyes from himself to God, and you can see that all the way through. And this is the end. He died not seeing the promise to Abraham. He died not seeing it. And this is the end of his life. This is Deuteronomy 34. It says, Moses climbed Mount Nebo. So they went milling around here, then went up to about here. Mount Nebo's just sort of northeast of the Dead Sea. And he looked out over this whole land here, which is the land that God had promised them. And it says, Moses climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to the top and across from Jericho. And there the Lord showed him the whole land, from Gilead to Dan, all of Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh. And the Lord said to him, this is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, when I said I will give it to your descendants. I have let your eyes see it, but you will not cross over into it. And Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there on Moab, as the Lord had said. And he buried him on Moab, in the valley opposite Beth Peor. But to this day, no one knows where his grave is. Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his eyes were not weak, nor his strength gone. The Israelites grieved for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days until the time of mourning was over. And I find myself sad. Every time I read that, I find myself quite sad. Like Moses, he's like, God takes him to this place, shows him it, and says, this is what I promised, but you're not going into it. And I find myself, and yet Moses wasn't sad, was he? And that's because Moses' eyes were never on that, in that sense. Moses' eyes were, and you see it as you go through the story, were about God being with him. Not about this promised land, it was about God being with him. There's a point in the story where God says to Abraham, look, I've had enough. You go, I will send an angel ahead of you, and they will come to this land, and you will have the land, but I will not go with you, in case I consume you all. And Moses' response was, if you're not going with us, don't send us up from here. Moses' pride, as it was what he had. When it says Moses walked with God as a man walks with his friend. That was what he was looking at. So to Moses, it didn't have that sadness. So I think for me, that's the thing I wanted to pull out, was actually this looking at God, not looking at our situation, but looking at ourselves. And this is, I mean, we're looking at Hebrews, this is what Hebrews is. Hebrews is about our journey, just like Moses' journey in the wilderness, really. Hebrews is about our journey towards a promised land. And it's about where we fix our eyes. And again in Hebrews it says, fix your eyes on Jesus, consider Jesus. And I think the very last thing I just wanted to leave us with was about the role we have with one another in that. In that Hebrews is described as a word of exhortation. It is a word of encouragement for us to lift our eyes, to do what we see through Moses' life he had done, to change where he's looking from his situation, from himself, and looking to God. And it's a letter, it was written by a brother or a sister 2,000 years ago, Hebrews, to us to do exactly that. But it is also an encouragement for us to do it one to another. And actually to come alongside one another when throughout life, and to say, lift your eyes, and to give that encouragement to one another to do it. Finally, just this week, I was talking to someone, Reese, just talking about how I felt quite dry. I feel like I've heard God for a while. And Reese sent me this verse, Zephaniah 3:17. This was just yesterday. He said, I wanted to encourage you with this. He said, though the fig tree does not bud, and there are no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails and fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen and no cattle in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God my Saviour. And that was the encouragement I needed, at that time. So, let's pray. Father, thank you for reading through that we have this stuff written. That we have this stuff written down that tells us and teaches us about what it means to live following you. Thank you for those that have gone before us. Thank you for the cloud of witnesses that surround us. God, will we be a people, that are constantly encouraging and exhorting one another to lift our eyes to you, the one that says, I will be with you, I will. And I thank you that we live this side of the cross, where we have, a greater insight than your people have then of who you are, God, and know you in a new way. Just pray, Holy Spirit, you would stir us in our faith, in our encouragement of one another. That we would grow, in our faith, and that would shape our lives. Amen.